John Graham, Minister for Transport. I'm joined by the Treasurer and also Minister Kotsis. Also joined by Josh Murray and Matt Longman from Transport for New South Wales, here to provide an update on the issues we've seen on the rail network today. We'll give you a view from the government and then a short operational update from Matt Longman, just so you've got some sense of what's unfolded on the network this morning. There has been a big impact on commuters on the network this morning. We've seen about a quarter of services cancelled, and that's had a big impact on people trying to commute, trying to move around the city. It's also had a big impact on businesses who are relying on those commuters to be able to move around the city, get to work, get into the CBD. So there have been. Matt will update the specifics about those services. We've also seen more than 350 staff who have not attended work today. I want to apologise to those people who have been affected. There's no question that this is having a big impact on the city. The government understands that people are sick of the train chaos in Sydney, and we want to work to find a way to end this. The key issue that's been debated over the course of late yesterday and this morning has been a $4,500 one-off sign-on bonus. This was in place under the last agreement several Transport Ministers ago, when David Elliott agreed to this one-off payment in the last industrial agreement. The government view is this was a one-off payment for that agreement, not part of this offer. One of the reasons we say that is the Transport emailed out to all of these workers to put the government offer on the record in an open way, to put the best case forward for what was being offered. We think it's a good offer. This sign-on bonus did not feature as that was emailed out. It didn't feature in the union counter-offer that followed. So to have this be the barrier to reaching a deal at the last moment is of concern. The government view is this was a one-off payment in the last agreement. The Liberal opposition view is this is a one-off payment in the last agreement. The Minister who offered it last time says this was a one-off agreement. It's only the union who believes this was on the table over 10 months, and that is now the key barrier to reaching agreement here. I want to be clear from a government point of view, this is not a lockout. We want these drivers at work. We want these train staff at work. While these negotiations continue, that's the goal here. But equally, the Premier, since last year, has made it clear we're not going to pay people to take industrial action. Workers have got a right to take industrial action, but it's very rare they expect to be paid for it as well. That's not the case with nurses taking industrial action, for example. They are having their pay docked. In this situation, the government's been clear since December that we won't be paying people to take industrial action. In terms of the steps from here, I can indicate that the government is lodging applications in the Fair Work Commission to stop this industrial action. That is taking place at the moment. We'll be seeking an urgent hearing in order to have that take effect. And that will provide us a path forward. We're also due in the Commission, in any case, on Monday morning. From a public point of view, this dispute's been very confusing. At one point it was about free fares, at one point it was about 24-hour running, now it's about a sign-on bonus. We understand that this needs to be settled. The concern here is, if the government agreed to this most recent demand, when would this end? There's a fair offer on the table. We would like it to be considered. We're open to negotiations, but at some point we've got to be able to deliver to the public a wage result for these essential workers that assists them, but trains that run for the public. Treasurer.
Thank you, Minister. I'm so sorry that Sydney has woken up to a sneak strike in support of a wild claim. These turn of events could easily have been avoided had the union engaged in good faith negotiations. I think most reasonable people would look at this circumstances and conclude that this has been a bad faith move from this union that is taking place at the public's expense. I have seen some of the communications from the union this morning. I do want to say that I think the union is gaslighting Sydney. I think what they're saying to the public is, and what they're saying to the government and what they're saying to the courts is clearly very different to what they're saying to their own members. I think that type of behaviour has to be called out and has to be avoided. Can I also say, in respect to the emergence of this last-minute claim from the RTBU, I find it very hard to believe that the previous Liberal government secretly agreed to a permanent $4,500 sign-on bonus every time the rail unions enter an agreement for rail workers only. No such arrangement applies to the rest of the public service. The idea that somehow Dominic Perrottet's government would have done this secret sweetheart deal with rail workers only is beyond belief. Clearly, we want this dispute solved. We've wanted this dispute solved for a long time. We have been working, and I've got to say, until last night, in good faith, working through many of the remaining issues that were outstanding. We do need to get this dispute behind us. The public deserves better than the way in which they're being treated. I'll turn to Matt now.
Thank you, Treasurer. It's been a challenging morning on the rail network this morning, and I want to apologise to all passengers who've been caught up in this latest round of industrial action. What we saw this morning was more than 350 train drivers and guards, a combination of sick leave, and some staff just didn't turn up for work. So that has created some really significant gaps in the way that we would normally service the network. Around a quarter of our services have been cancelled so far today. Around 465 services so far today have been cancelled across the network. That has created delays and cancellations across every line on the Sydney Trains network. We are seeing particular impacts on the T2 and on the T8 line at the moment. So our advice to passengers is to obviously look for alternative modes of transport today, particularly for those that are travelling to the airport. We have a limited number of coaches operating from Central Station running a shuttle service to the airport, but we expect that the delays and the cancellations will increase throughout the day. We've got our next round of crew signing on in the early afternoon around 2 o'clock. We do expect the number of cancellations will increase, but that will be dependent on the number of staff absent at that time on the afternoon sign-on. Again, we're doing everything we can at the Rail Operations Centre to keep our service operating. We're currently continuing to operate trains across all lines, but there are significant delays and cancellations. Our advice to passengers is to use the travel apps. If you need to travel on public transport, look for alternative modes if possible. If you're travelling to the airport, if you're relying on your children getting home from school, please check in with them to ensure that they're able to navigate the system this afternoon. We'll be doing everything we can to keep services operating safely. This is a very challenging period, and clearly we can't operate trains without train drivers. That's the challenge that we have at the moment. We'll continue working through the day. Please continue to respect our frontline staff, particularly our station staff. They'll be doing everything they can to keep passengers moving safely, acknowledging the significant gaps that we will have in services today. Thank you.
Right. Questions?
Can I ask Secretary Murray a question? When did you first raise with the RTBU
That did not happen. That, as it's been characterised, as the Minister and Treasurer have said, we've been working through in forensic detail the last clauses and conditions of this agreement. And as has been noted already, that has been largely in good faith, looking at practical ways to get the deal over the line. Not to me, but on Wednesday night this week, a text message came in saying, oh, by the way, we need to look at this one-off sign-on bonus. This is the first time that that has been raised in the negotiations. It is the first time through all the correspondence that's been set out, the number of offers that have been made by the government and the rail agencies to the combined rail unions, that there's been any challenge around what occurred in the signing of the last agreement. And in fact, our offer, as was publicly sent to all 13,000 Sydney Trains and New South Wales Trainlink staff in January, on the advice of the Fair Work Commission, very clearly set out that back pay to the end of the last agreement was provided.
But just to clarify, you never told the ITBU that it was your intention for that to be carried over into the agreement.
No, that's correct. When the issue of the sign-on bonus from the last agreement was raised, then during yesterday's discussion, it was very clearly conveyed that we did not intend and had not costed and had not included in the package, which had been very detailed and forensically worked through with all the unions, this was not part of the existing offer.
And how much would that bonus cost?
$60 million.
Were you aware of that clause at all prior to last night? The union characterised it as if you hadn't essentially done your homework by not knowing that that was in the previous agreement. What do you make of that?
No, that's not the case. We've been very clear about what is and what isn't in the agreement. If you cast your mind back to the start of this discussion, when the union log of claims was sent out in the second quarter of last year, it contained 350 individual requests in that log of claims. This was not one of them.
Can I just pick up on that too? Can I also just say, anyone who reads the clause to themselves can see for themselves, in writing, it says one-off. The idea, I think as a former union official, I would just say it's quite obvious that that is something you need to rebargain for if that's what you wish for it to continue. And I've got to say, on the literal reading of the document, combined with the reading of the communications back in the time, as well anyone who looks at the full bench decision from the Industrial Relations Commission when it comes to the previous government's dispute, it's quite clear it was a one-off that was played at that time.
As a former union official, can you really stand there and say that you would be okay with an employer removing a clause from an EA without having raised it with you during negotiations?
Well, I would say that you would make such an assessment by looking at the totality of the offer. And when you look at what the government's offering in terms of pay and in terms of conditions, you would conclude that rail workers are much better off overall under the government's offer. And the other point I'd make when it comes to this is that this pay offer has been hard fought, and we should acknowledge that as a result of the 10 months of conversations, the union itself has agreed to changes which will mean that we can deliver a better rail service and pay them more. That is the spirit of the system in which we intended. But to turn up at 5 minutes to midnight and spring a claim for $4,500 extra is bad faith.
But Treasurer, how can you say that? As you say, 5 minutes to midnight, 10 months of conversations, and the public is led to believe there was just this assumption from the government that this clause would go, and from the union this clause would stay. Like, how is that not covered? Like a $60 million clause, how is that not covered in 10 months?
I think because the way in which bargaining takes place is that the unions begin by lodging a log of claims, and clearly they did not include this in their log of claims. There's obviously a dispute that they are disputing as to whether they needed to. Ultimately, ordinary common sense would suggest that if you are asking for $60 million in pay, you'd claim it. The fact that it wasn't in their log of claims is the reasons why the machinery of government wasn't triggered until they claimed it last night.
Can I just ask where the government's thinking's at now? Are you totally opposed to any bonus payment, or would you consider something smaller, less than $4,500?
Well, we simply make the point that the government has put a very good offer on the table that reflects fairness, that delivers real wage growth, that also allows us to get on with the job of actually improving rail delivery for commuters, and makes sure that our essential workers are treated with respect through that process.
So no level of bonus payment is on the table in your perspective?
I would simply say that what we had worked on with the union in the last week in particular very much reflected the contributions that they were making. We are confident that the offer we are putting is fair. They did not ask for an additional sign-on bonus until last night, in essence.
You said they haven't asked for equally, isn't it your job to tell them that you want to remove a clause from there?
No, because again, read the clause. The clause says it's one-off. Ordinarily, most people would understand that that clause automatically expires unless you demand for it to stay. And it's disappointing that the dispute is having to bog down in this level of minutiae when, frankly, the offer on the table is pretty good. And I've got to say, there are lots of rail workers who do deserve a pay rise, who haven't had a pay rise since May. And we've given them an offer that would deliver meaningful real wage increases over the next few years that properly reflects the fact that there is good improvements for the rail system. And like we said we would, we're sharing those benefits with the workforce that is helping us create them. I'd also just go back and say, once more, the idea that the previous Liberal government entered into a sweetheart deal that would see rail workers and rail workers alone get sign-on bonuses every time they reach an agreement without telling anyone defies common sense.
Toby from the union was at pains to point out that one-off offer was an incredibly sort of rare wording in an EBA. It didn't happen very often. Is that because it was meant specifically to be one-off to that agreement?
No, because again, I would say again, it's a very good question. And that's why if you were to read the Fair Work transcript at the time, it's clear that the reasons why that payment was made was in lieu of back pay for that particular period of time. And the fact that the previous government had taken a period of time to negotiate meant that the full bench of the Fair Work Commission said that this one-off payment is for the back pay. Clearly, we have already provided the union suggestions as to how we can make sure that workers are back paid too. And that's what distinguishes it from the current bargain. That's an important point. The fact that the previous government solved its 20-month back pay issue through a $4,500 payment. And if you really want to test the detail, you will see the Full Bench Commission said mathematically that has been calculated to reflect that back pay period from the time where the previous agreement had expired and the new agreement had come into place.
Why don't you get this arbitrated? Why don't you just take this point out of Fair Work?
Well, I would say that we are obviously taking action to bring an end to this next strike. That is the first part of our response through the Fair Work Commission.
But the $4.5 grand, why don't you ask the Fair Work Commission to decide on this point?
Well, look, I think
if it's the last barrier to a deal that's been 10 months in the making, why not let them decide?
Well, I think that because they'd have to decide it in the context of the full wage offer. And if it's the case that the unions are inclined to allow the full wage offer to be arbitrated, then that's a proposition that the government will obviously consider. But that's not been the view that the unions have put. The view the unions have put is they would like the rest of the wage offers to remain as it is and only allow this to be arbitrated. We don't think practically that can be done. We think that if the Fair Work Commission needs to arbitrate, it needs to arbitrate the totality of the agreement.
Can I ask a question?
I was going to say, they insinuated that they brought this $4,500 bonus up in negotiations because they were trying to fund 1% in the final year of the pay offer, and they offered something that was less expensive. Are you still willing to negotiate and take that less expensive offer of the 1% in the final year of the pay offer?
Well, we would like to resolve the dispute, but I'd simply say I think that's the third explanation I've heard. And I think that part of the issue that we are encountering is that the union's position changes constantly. As the Minister made the point, last week the strike action was to get compensation for previous fares. At some point in the dispute it was for weekend 24-hour travel. At another point in this dispute it's been for 50-cent fares. I think people just want this dispute to end.
Treasurer, haven't we reached a point where the government has shown itself incapable of running this essential service? We're at this point now, aren't we?
No, I think that what we are seeing play out here is a sneak strike brought on by a union in pursuit of a wild claim at the last minute.
Well, we've got a union saying let's F up the network. I mean, that's how far you're apart.
And I do think that that language has to be called out. And I do think that that is part of the reasons why I say that it does look as though what the union is saying to the public is very different to what they're saying to their members.
Matt, can I just ask you, just in your comments about more than 350 staff not turning up, you mentioned some of those have called in sick. How do you tell the difference between those who haven't turned up and those who've called in sick? Couldn't 350 people call in sick today?
Well, based on the numbers that we've seen, there is a very significant uptick in sick leave, so more people have called in sick today than what we have seen in a very, very long time. That's even during the period of COVID and the like. So certainly a very significant uptick in sick leave. We've also had, as I said, around 100 of our train crew have not even called. They just haven't turned up for work. So that's not part of anything that we've initiated. It's not part of a lockout or anything like that. This is potentially staff following the instruction of parts of a union movement. So we've seen, the media today has called out some of those communications that have gone out. That has clearly had an impact on staff today. They haven't come to work, and that's a concern for this afternoon.
Will you be asking for medical certificates given the unusually high number of sick leave?
Look, I can't comment on the process around sick leave. I think it will be a normal process. We obviously best endeavours, and the vast majority of our staff do the right thing. If they're sick, they won't come to work. Otherwise, they will. So a big uptick today. We'll have a look at that in detail in the coming days.
What
The
level of
union
service do you
says that
think
there
we'll
were
have this afternoon?
lockout notices sent out to 5,000 people. Was there a notice? You dispute that it's not a lockout, but what was the notice that went out?
I want to be very clear that at no stage has Sydney Trains or New South Wales Trains or the New South Wales Government locked out any part of the rail workforce. We don't pay our staff who undertake industrial action. That's been a process that's been in place for a number of months. It's affected not just the Rail, Tram and Bus Union, but the Electrical Trades Union. Those staff that took action on Wednesday, just a couple of days ago, were not paid for that action. They were not paid while they were not in the workplace. That's been our consistent approach. That doesn't involve locking staff out.
Was that the mass communique? That explaining that you won't get paid if you...
I'm not sure I follow your question. There has been various communications with our staff to make sure everyone understands their obligations, their rights to take industrial action if they're union members, and what's lawful. That's what's very important.
What level of service do you fear you're going to be left with this afternoon?
As I said, at the moment we've had around 465 services cancelled. My sense is that number will increase into the afternoon. Unfortunately, Valentine's Day today, people will be out and about in the city and around Sydney this evening. My advice would be to avoid the rail network if you need to get to a dinner date. Equally, if you're travelling to the airport, particularly as many people do on a Friday afternoon, we are operating a limited service, shuttle service on buses from Central Station to the airport, but consider other modes. Potentially catch the metro to Sydenham and potentially a short Uber or taxi from Sydenham to the airport would be my advice.
When did you say the afternoon shift starts? Did you say 2 o'clock?
We generally have 2 shift patterns, so we have an early morning shift, and that's what we saw this morning with the sort of very significant uptick in staff absence, and then another shift change in the early afternoon, so around about 2 o'clock this afternoon.
So, just, I don't know whether you can provide context. 350, what percentage of that is of the workforce, or becomes obviously not the whole workforce, but train crew?
So it's a little bit, I think on a normal day we would need around 750 train drivers to operate a full service. So we operate about 3,200 services a day across the rail network. 750 train drivers would be required to operate that full shift. At the moment, the 350 includes drivers and guards. So that number, as I said, is likely to increase. And our advice and our message to all of our staff is, please, if you're rostered on this afternoon, please attend work and help us keep trains running for those people that need them.
Just with the cancellations, you said that it'll be increasing to, so more than the 450 cancelled so far. What are we talking, like 900, 1,000 by the end of the day?
Look, I wouldn't want to speculate on the number of services. We'll be doing everything we can. At the moment, I've spent the morning with the team at the Rail Operations Centre. All of our operational leaders are in place, doing everything they can to minimise inconvenience. But it's very important to alert everybody that these cancellations and these delays are likely to increase this afternoon.
Are you bothering to phone the staff to see whether they're coming in, because they've been told not to answer their phones?
Look, I can't speak for the operational details. Obviously, we have processes in place for staff that are absent and they're able to provide that notice. around 100 staff this morning we haven't even heard from, so they just haven't appeared, haven't turned up, haven't signed on for their shift.
The union was suggesting that if staff came into work today, there was a risk that they might not get paid. Is that true?
Look, our position on the bans in place are that those staff that are deliberately taking action to slow services down, to create delays on the network, participating in this industrial action, an option is that we wouldn't pay them for that shift. That's correct.
But if they turn up and they do their job in totality, they will be paid?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we would always take a very measured approach. We understand there's delays on the network, there's red signals, there's temporary speed restrictions, there's medical incidents. Every day we have incidents across the network.
Well, why not just dock their pay in proportion to the industrial action?
Look, I think it's probably difficult to get into the detail at the moment. What I can say is that we have not locked out any staff. We've been very reasonable in our approach and we've been consistent in our approach. What we've seen in the record number of staff absences is clearly something has changed.
Isn't Sydney Trains making these delays worse by issuing these 471 notices? Because workers aren't coming to work because they're afraid they're not going to get paid. Like, why take that step?
Look, our objective is to keep trains running reliably, and it's always been our objective to minimise inconvenience for passengers. We appreciate that staff are able to take protected industrial action, and that's part of the process that we're in while we're bargaining for the new enterprise agreement. We will take action, as staff take action, as unions take action. It needs to be lawful action.
Just a question for John Graham. You said you're going to the Commission today lodging some applications. Can you outline exactly what you're hoping that will achieve temporarily, at least before Monday?
Yeah, we're lodging actions at the moment in the Fair Work Commission, hoping to stop this current industrial action. We're looking for some relief while these discussions continue. Obviously, this has had a big impact. We'll be taking the evidence of that impact. Also, obviously, there's some evidence of how this occurred, the evidence of coordination. They're matters that we think the Fair Work Commission should consider.
So is this another 424 then?
Look, I won't confirm the individual details of it. Those are being prepared and lodged at the moment, but we'll be able to update about the Commission proceedings later.
And what can we say about train services moving forward over the weekend, for example, into the new week?
Yeah, look, we'll continue to update as the situation evolves. Obviously, it really is an evolving situation. We were notified about this activity late at night. That was when the operational crew first became aware of the scale of this impact. We've alerted the public as soon as we can. We'll continue to alert the public. I'd encourage them to check their apps, check the travel advice over the coming days.
And in terms of negotiations with regards to the enterprise bargaining agreement, you said that you sent the union your offer in detail and it didn't have that bonus in it. Did you just list what was in the offer, or did you actually send them the comprehensive draft of the EBA?
One of the key moments in January was the wage offer. The offer altogether was shared with 13,000 staff. It was sent out, it was an open offer. The government at the time felt it was a good offer and wanted to make sure that people knew if it was signed up to, this is what the benefits would be, and they were listed in detail. This was the case put out to those workers to say, look, here are the details, make a judgment for yourself as an point of information during the campaign. In putting the breadth of that offer, all the good reasons why you might want to take another look at this offer, this $4,500 payment didn't feature. The idea that it was going to be paid, but it wasn't being put in that case, to me, I was less involved at the time, to me beggars belief. I don't understand how you could then say, well, we thought this was always part of the deal along the way. As I look at it, without making a huge judgment about how we've got here, I mean, that just beggars belief.
Was it the draft agreement though? I mean, maybe it's one of the Secretary of State.
Can I ask that? So ordinarily the practice is that you reach a heads of agreement that then gets translated into the legal document. Of course, everyone should know that that current award is, the EBA is 240 pages. In the last agreement, it took about, I believe, 4 to 6 weeks to do the final drafting of the clauses. Of course, all combined rail unions all have an interest in the precise legal language, and that is why it does take long from the point where you enter a heads of agreement to actually conclude the drafting. So what was being discussed in the last 2 days was a draft heads of agreement, and that is just consistent with all private sector bargaining at this scale, and certainly public sector conversations that we have to.
So for the union, or for example, the opposition to claim that you hadn't shared the draft EBA and that you should have, and for them to be aware that
that's not. Well, I don't know whether I haven't heard what the opposition's claimed in that respect. But assuming that that is what they've claimed, that's not the practice they followed in government. What they followed in government was basically you reach an agreement and you turn it over to the lawyers to write the clauses, and then you bring it back together before you lodge it. So there's been no departure from the practice that has been adopted by the previous government.
And as a former head of a union...
I wasn't the head of a union.
Sorry, pardon. A former union, your former union hat. Apologies for the promotion. But to be in those negotiations where, you know, it seems like the government was blindsided by this claim, quite a hefty claim, and for negotiations to fall apart and hours later, then to have union rhetoric of let's F up the network, what do you make of that behaviour?
I think it's bad faith. I think Sydney deserves better. I think commuters deserve better. I'm more disappointed on behalf of the travelling public than I am on myself.
Mr. Longwood, can I just double check? You may have said this, but when did you become aware of the one-off? Mr. Murray said Wednesday, text message. Was that message from you? Or?
No, the text message wasn't from me. I've been involved in the negotiations along with the Transport Secretary and a number of other leaders for almost a week now, and that's been our sole purpose, was to get to an agreement, and we were very disappointed about the outcome last night, and I wasn't aware of this claim, no.
You weren't aware, so last night?
I wasn't aware until yesterday, that's correct.
So can we get this from the union said today, just to anyone, that the conditions they're all concerned about, the technology issue, the inspection maintenance issue has been resolved. It is literally just this payment that is the final barrier. It is this one issue that's up for contention.
Well, it's fair to say that we've narrowed the differences on many of the other issues. But as a result of this last claim, we can't say we're close. This is material. This is not a small disagreement. It does work out, in essence, to be an additional 5% claim on wages in the first year. So certainly we did narrow many of the remaining differences, but it did crystallise that there is still this gap around wage expectations. Now, the union has been clear that they've sought a 32% pay rise over the life of this agreement, and to the best of our knowledge, that claim did not include this additional claim for a sign-on bonus of $4,500, which in essence mathematically takes their claim up to about 37%.
Mr. Mookhey, one thing that could be relied on this morning was the metro. Do you look forward to the day when Sydney will have even more metro and fewer drivers to be concerned about?
Well, look, I think that we want to deliver people a terrific service, whether it's heavy rail, whether it's light rail, whether it is metro.
Can I just ask Sophie, Minister Cox, obviously this has been going on for 10 months now. I'm interested to know how you would characterise what's occurred, I guess, over the period and what we've seen last night from an industrial relations perspective.
Look, I think that there have been times, particularly lately, where there have been some good faith. There has been a lot of good faith and willingness. As has been said by the Treasurer and Minister for Transport, that you know, I'm very disappointed, particularly for the travelling public, and as today, Valentine's Day, and also we've got the weekend, and there's a lot of activity that's happening. Of course, there have been a lot of positive discussions, but a lot of robust discussions with respect to the forensic details, and it is disappointing. It is very disappointing, and you know, this has been thrown in at, you know, as has been said, at the very last moment. So I am very disappointed.
Minister, with respect, robust is hardly the word to use when it comes to effing up the network, is it? I mean, way beyond robust.
With respect to those comments, that is inappropriate, absolutely inappropriate, and the public, the travelling public, deserve to have a service that is run, and absolutely the people that work for the railways are 13,000 people who do very important work. We've got 1 million people that use the system every single day. Everybody has to work cooperatively, but I do not agree with those comments at all. Absolutely. It's very disappointing that has been said and that has been put through, that has been said. It is disappointing.
Do you now regret removing the wages cap?
We made a commitment to the people of New South Wales that after 12 years of the opposition's 2.5 wages cap, we made a commitment. We went to the election to remove the wages cap, and we have done that. And what we have done is set up a new system here in New South Wales with respect to a new industrial relations system, and it is about bargaining. It's about coming to the table and putting forward items, putting forward conditions and working through those. And we have done some really important work over the last 18 months. We've put through a new Industrial Relations Amendment Act, and absolutely we are pursuing our goal we removed the wages cap, and that was very important. We took that to the election, and that's what the people of New South Wales voted our government to do.
We're in a setting where over the last 10 months or so, people can't rely on their train services. It changes daily, it seems. Is this hurting the wider union movement? I urge that particularly the workers today to make sure to come back, to go into work. It's very, very important, and people expect these government services to be run, and we have an expectation that they are run. And I am urging the workers to come into work and to do their job.
Question for Mr. Graham. Do you think Toby Warnes has lost control of the union, given he denies responsibility for today's action?
Well, that's really a matter for the union and the leader of that union. I think what is evident is there's been some coordination here, and that is of concern. I think it's of concern to the public to see coordinated action, a significant number of people taking that, and significant disruption as a result.
What do you make of him refusing to apologise for those comments that they took up the network?
Well, look, I think, firstly, those comments are totally unacceptable. Evidence of coordination. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But look, we should all apologise here. The government has. We're very sorry for the impact this is having on commuters. Well, the union should as well.